"Grandpa, please stay home, you'll embarrass me." Those were Ethan's words. Sharp, cold, a blade straight through my chest. I froze, my lips trembled, but no sound came out. I wanted to ask him why, but his eyes told me everything. He truly meant it. Embarrass him, me. The same boy I once carried on my shoulders, the same boy I fed when his father wasn't around. Now he looked at me as if I were a stain he wanted to wipe away. I forced myself to stay still, to breathe. My hands shook, though I hid them in my pockets. I never thought, I whispered to myself, that the child I raised with my own hands would see me as nothing but an embarrassment. Before we continue, kindly subscribe to my channel. If you've ever been betrayed by family, you'll understand my story. Tell me where you're watching this from, and listen closely, because what happened next left everyone speechless. I sat in the living room, hands folded over my knees. Ethan was stuffing papers into his school bag, the way he always did when nervous. I cleared my throat gently. "Ethan," I said, forcing a smile, "your debate is tomorrow, isn't it?" I thought I could come along, maybe sit in the audience. "I'd like to see you shine." His shoulders stiffened. He didn't turn around. "You don't need to come," he muttered. I chuckled softly. "Don't be silly. Why wouldn't I? I've seen every important moment of yours since you were little." Finally, he faced me. His jaw was tight. "Because you'll embarrass me." The words punched through me. I blinked. "Embarrass you, yes." His voice rose. "You wear those old suits. Your hands shake when you clap. People laugh behind my back. Just stay home." I stared at him, unable to breathe. My lips parted, but no words came. Anna, sitting nearby, put her book down. "Ethan, that's not fair. Your grandfather has done more for you than anyone." Ethan snapped back. "Mum, you don't get it. He doesn't belong there. Everyone's parents are polished, rich, modern. He'll look out of place." My chest ached. "Out of place," I repeated under my breath. Anna shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "He raised you when your father was too busy. Don't you dare speak to him like this." That was when Michael walked in, briefcase in hand, his tie loosened. "What's going on here?" "Dad," Ethan said quickly, "Grandpa wants to come to my debate. I told him not to." Michael sighed heavily, as if he had been expecting this. He dropped his case on the couch. "The boy is right. You'll only make him look bad." Anna gasped. "Michael." I turned to him, my throat burning. "You agree with him?" Michael's eyes were cold. "Father, you don't understand how things work now. Kids are judged by everything, the way they talk, the family they keep. If Ethan says you'll embarrass him, maybe you should respect that." I felt the blood drain from my face. Respect, being unwanted. Ethan crossed his arms. "You don't get it, Grandpa. It's not personal, it's just reality." I laughed bitterly, though no joy reached my voice. "Not personal. I carried you when you couldn't walk. I stayed up when you had fevers. I skipped meals so you could eat. And now you tell me it's not personal." Ethan's eyes flickered, but he didn't back down. "I didn't ask for that. You chose it." The room fell silent. Anna buried her face in her hands. "How can you speak that way? That man, your grandfather, he gave you everything." Michael snapped. "Enough, Anna. Don't guilt the boy. He has to build his own image. If father can't see that, then maybe he should stop interfering." I pressed my palms together tightly, trying to steady the trembling. My heart felt like it was breaking into glass shards. Every word I Thought cut deeper than a knife. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. I stood slowly. I see. My voice cracked. You've both made it clear. My presence is a burden. My existence, an embarrassment. Anna reached out. No, Samuel, please don't. I pulled away gently. It's fine, Anna, don't worry, Michael muttered. This is for the best. I glanced once more at Ethan. His face was hard, unyielding. My grandson, my blood, and yet, in that moment, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I walked toward the door. My shoes scraped against the floor, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, Anna cried out, "You'll regret this one day, Ethan, you will." But he didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind me. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp, like truth itself. I stood there under the porch light, my body shaking. My heart whispered what my lips could not. I was not just unwanted, I was erased from their world. And I walked away, crushed under the weight of silence. I waited until the house grew quiet. My chest was still heavy from earlier, but silence gave me courage. I knocked gently on Ethan's door. "Come in," he said, without looking up from his desk. I stepped inside. Papers, trophies, certificates all lined neatly. His world of achievements. I stood at the doorway, unsure if I belonged. "Ethan," I said softly, "we need to talk." He sighed, setting his pen down. "Grandpa, not this again." "Yes, this again." My voice trembled, but I steadied it. "Do you really see me as nothing but a burden?" His eyes flicked toward me, cold, distant. "Grandpa, I need respect. At school, at events, every detail matters. You don't understand my world. Just stay out of it." My heart clenched. Not understand. I've lived long enough to know more about the world than you can imagine. He shook his head. "Your world isn't mine. Times have changed. You don't fit in." I walked closer, each step slow. "Do you remember the nights you were sick, burning with fever? Your father was gone, working late, and your mother couldn't manage alone. Who carried you in his arms, whispering stories until you slept?" He shifted uncomfortably. "That was years ago. Do you remember your first school play?" I continued, my throat tight. "You froze on stage. I held your hand from the front row, mouthing the lines until you found your voice. You won applause because I believed in you." Ethan pressed his lips together. "That was then, this is now." The words struck harder than any blow. My knees weakened, but I refused to collapse in front of him. "So the past means nothing?" I asked quietly. "The nights I went hungry so you could eat. The winters I walked miles to get you medicine. None of it matters now." His tone sharpened. "It's not about that, Grandpa. People judge me. They laugh. You don't see the whispers, the smirks. You don't belong in my circle. I can't afford to look weak." I closed my eyes for a moment. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Weak? You think love makes you weak? You think sacrifice is shameful?" "Image is everything," he said flatly. "I have to protect mine." I stared at him, my own flesh and blood, yet I could hardly recognize him. "The boy I once carried on my shoulders," I whispered, "now carries nothing but shame for me." He turned his gaze away. "Grandpa, don't make this harder. I don't hate you. I just need space. Stay out of my world." My chest hollowed. "Your world," I repeated, "was built on my back. Every step you take stands on the sacrifices I made." His silence answered more than words could. I wanted to shake him, to remind him that respect was not bought with image, but earned with heart. But the lump in my throat made it impossible. Instead, I stepped back toward the door. "Very well," I said, voice heavy. "If I am nothing more than an embarrassment, I will stay out of your world." He muttered something, maybe regret, maybe relief, but I didn't stop to hear it. The hallway felt longer than it ever had. Anna's voice carried faintly from the kitchen, Michael's deep tone behind her. But I no longer felt part of that house. I closed myself in my room, sinking onto the chair by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered, indifferent to the storms inside me. I pressed a hand to my chest. How quickly love turns to shame. How quickly blood forgets its roots. Alone, I whispered to the night, "I am not just excluded. I am no longer family." The silence answered back, and it felt true. The house had grown quieter since the argument. Silence pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating, as if even the furniture carried the weight of words unspoken. Samuel sat alone in his room, the dim lamp casting a weak circle of light across the worn carpet. For days he had kept to himself, voiding the living room, avoiding their eyes, avoiding the wound that still bled inside his chest. Every memory replayed in his mind, each sharper than the last. Ethan's words, Michael's agreement, even Anna's silence, soft but heavy, felt like betrayal. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased, he whispered to the dark. The next afternoon, a knock stirred him from his thoughts. It was Clara, his longtime neighbor, holding a small basket of bread. She had always been kind, often dropping by with simple gestures that carried more warmth than entire conversations with his own family. "You've been too quiet, Samuel," she said gently, setting the basket down. "I thought perhaps you needed company." He managed a weak smile, though his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. Company, or saving from my own thoughts? She chuckled softly. "Perhaps both. Sit with me a while." They settled by the window, the world outside painted in late afternoon gold. For a time, neither spoke. Samuel finally broke the silence, his voice trembling. "Clara, do you ever wonder what worth a man has, if even his own blood cannot see it?" Her eyes softened, but her reply was firm. "Worth isn't measured by the blind. If someone refuses to see your value, it doesn't vanish. It only means they are too small to hold it." Samuel shook his head, bitterness rising. "But respect, how can I demand it when my own son looks at me with shame?" Clara leaned forward. "Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. But listen closely, Samuel. Sometimes people only learn its value when they lose it. A child who mocks a father's sacrifice has not yet faced the day he must sacrifice himself. Life teaches, whether we wish it or not." Her words struck him harder than Ethan's cruelty ever could, because in them lay truth. He lowered his gaze, feeling the sting of clarity. "So, I have two paths," he thought. The first stretched before him like a shadowed pit, to drown in humiliation, to keep shrinking until he disappeared entirely. That road promised nothing but bitterness and slow decay. The second path glimmered, faintly, fragile but alive, to rebuild himself, brick by fragile brick. Not to beg for acceptance, not to plead for scraps of respect, but to rise quietly, and let the very life that scorned him prove his worth in time. He closed his eyes, and images surfaced: Ethan as a child, riding on his shoulders, laughing freely, unaware of the world's judgments. That boy was gone, replaced by a young man desperate for validation in all the wrong places. And Samuel, he had been left behind, discarded like an old coat. The pain was sharp, but something new burned beneath it. Resolve. If my own blood rejects me, Samuel whispered, his voice steady now, then I must create a life where their rejection no longer controls me. Clara smiled faintly, placing a hand on his arm. That is the beginning of freedom, Samuel. When you no longer beg for a seat at the table that cast you out. For the first time in weeks, Samuel drew a long, steady breath. The ache was still there, but beneath it, something had shifted. He was no longer only the man humiliated in his own home. He was a man who had been broken, yes, but now had the chance to rise. To live not as an echo of their approval, but as the author of his own worth. As the evening deepened and Clara took her leave, Samuel stood by the window, watching the fading sun sink behind the rooftops. In its dying glow, he found a quiet promise, one he made to himself. The man they dismissed, the man they mocked, would not disappear. He would endure, he would rebuild, and when the time came, the very ones who cast him aside would see the truth, not through his pleas, but through the life he forged in silence. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation, rows of students and parents filling the seats. Banners for the inter-school debate competition hung proudly, and the faint smell of polished wood lingered in the air. Samuel stood at the very back, pressed against the wall near the exit, his cap pulled low. He had promised himself he wouldn't come. He had promised to respect Ethan's cruel wish, and yet, here he was, not for pride, not for recognition, but because the heart of a grandfather refuses to turn cold. Even when wounded, from his hidden corner, Samuel watched Ethan stride onto the stage in his neatly pressed blazer. The boy's confidence was striking, almost blinding every step, a declaration that he belonged. The debate began. Ethan's voice was sharp, polished, commanding attention. His arguments cut with precision, his gestures full of authority. Murmurs rippled through the audience of narration, approval. Samuel felt a pang of pride, despite everything. But as the minutes passed, he noticed something else, a certain edge in Ethan's tone, a sneer when opponents spoke, the subtle arrogance in the way he dismissed their points, not just refuting, but belittling. The applause grew thinner, less warm, as if people respected his skill but recoiled from his attitude. From the corner, Samuel whispered to himself, confidence without humility turns talent into poison. As the debate closed, the judges rose to announce commendations. Among them stood Mr. Hazan, older gentleman, silver hair neatly combed, his presence commanding a quiet respect. Samuel recognized him instantly. Years ago, he had been one of Samuel's apprentices in the carpentry shop, a boy eager to learn, patient with his hands, humble with his mistakes. When the floor opened for comments, Mr. Hayes's voice carried firmly through the hall. Impressive work today. These young voices give me hope for the future. But let me remind everyone true. Greatness lies not just in what you say, but how you carry yourself. A hush fell. Ethan shifted uncomfortably on stage. Mr. Hayes turned slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd, then landing near the back. A smile flickered. There is a man in this room who taught me that lesson. When I was young, I learned not only a craft, but a way of living from him. Humility, patience, and strength. That man is Samuel. Gasps scattered across the audience. Heads turned. Samuel froze where he stood. the cap trembling in his hand. Students whispered, "Samuel," the old man at the back. "Wait, that's Ethan's grandfather, isn't it?" Ethan's eyes widened, his jaw tightening. His polished smile faltered for the first time that evening. Mr. Hayes continued warmly, "Everything I have achieved, I owe in part to him. If you want to understand respect, look there. Because respect is not demanded, is lived." Applause erupted, not thunderous, but genuine, deep. A recognition that carried weight. Samuel's chest tightened. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't asked for it. He wanted to disappear before Ethan saw the shame in his eyes. But it was too late. From the stage, Ethan's gaze locked onto him. No words were exchanged, but the silence screamed. In that single glance, Ethan's confidence cracked. His carefully constructed image trembled, because the man he had called an embarrassment was now honored by someone he admired. The irony cut sharper than any argument in that debate. Samuel slipped quietly out of the hall before anyone else could approach. His steps were slow, heavy, yet somewhere deep within, a faint ember glowed. The world had spoken not through Samuel's defense, but through life itself, and Ethan, for the first time, was forced to taste the bitterness of his arrogance. Samuel had grown used to the silence of his home, the kind of silence that could devour a man if he let it. But instead of surrendering to its emptiness, he began to fill it with something else. Purpose. Every morning he rose early, brushed the faint silver in his hair, and walked to the old school he had once taught at. The building had aged cracks on the walls, faded paint, the creak of wooden benches, but stepping inside was like breathing life into his forgotten self. At first, the teachers were surprised. "Mr. Samuel," one of them asked, eyes wide, "it's been years since you've walked these halls." Samuel smiled gently. "I thought perhaps I could be of some use again, maybe with the children who struggle." And so, little by little, he began tutoring the ones others had nearly given up on. Children with tired eyes and heavy burdens found in him not just a teacher, but a patient guide. His lectures weren't grand speeches, but soft words spoken with sincerity. His reputation quiet, humble, steady began to spread once again. One day after class, a young girl whispered shyly, "Sir, my father says you once helped him pass his exams. He told me I should thank you for changing his life." Samuel's eyes moistened. He simply nodded, because words often failed where gratitude lived. Meanwhile, Ethan's world was shifting in a direction he hadn't anticipated. At school, he strutted through the halls with his usual self-assured grin, but the laughter that once surrounded him was thinner now. Friends began to withdraw, their patience worn by his constant arrogance. During group discussions, Ethan's voice often drowned others out. What once seemed like confidence now reeked of superiority. "Why do you always have to act like you're better than everyone?" a classmate muttered one day, fed up. Ethan rolled his eyes. "I don't act, I am." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Even the teachers had started to notice. Mr. Hayes, who had praised Samuel at the debate, had grown colder toward Ethan, offering less encouragement and more pointed stares. Ethan couldn't ignore the shift, but his pride refused to acknowledge it. At home, his frustration spilled over. Ethan slammed his bag onto the couch, startling Anna, who was folding laundry. "Why is everyone suddenly talking about Grandpa? I told him to stay out of my life, yet now all I hear is his name." Anna kept her hands steady on the fabric, her voice calm. "Maybe that's because he's earning their respect, Ethan, not demanding it." Ethan's face twisted. Respect. He's old. He's irrelevant. I worked hard to stand out, and now he's taking the attention that should be mine. Anna sighed, finally meeting his glare. No one gave him respect out of pity. They respect him because he gives to others without expecting anything back. Ask yourself, Ethan, why do they respect him more than you? Her words landed with the weight of truth, but Ethan shoved it aside with a scoff. That's ridiculous. He stormed off to his room, but her voice lingered in his mind like an echo he couldn't silence. Back in his room, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, unease gnawed at him. He remembered the way Mr. Hayes had looked at his grandfather, eyes full of admiration, reverence. It didn't make sense. To Ethan, Samuel was just an embarrassment, a relic from the past, and yet, to everyone else, he was something Ethan couldn't grasp, a man worth honoring. Ethan clenched his fists. No, he whispered to himself, they're wrong, they have to be. But doubt, once planted, has a way of growing in silence. The table was set with laughter, or at least the performance of it. Dishes clinked, wine was poured, and Michael sat at the head, proud as ever. Ethan, glowing with the vanity of youth, dominated the conversation, recounting his debate triumphs as if the world revolved around his words. I handled the final round flawlessly, Ethan bragged, smirking as he leaned back in his chair. The judges had no choice but to side with me. Michael nodded approvingly, his pride stitched tightly to his son's performance. That's my boy, sharp, quick, just like I raised him. Samuel sat quietly, eyes lowered, his fork barely touching the food. He wasn't there to boast, nor to reclaim space. He was simply present, as though testing whether his existence still had meaning at the family table. Then came the moment no one expected. Ethan's debate teacher, Mr. Graham, had joined the dinner as an honored guest. Between sips of water, he leaned toward Samuel and said warmly, "Sir, I didn't get the chance to tell you earlier, but thank you. The lessons you gave those struggling students last month, it turned their grades around. Some of them were on the verge of dropping out, and now they have hope again." The room fell silent. Forks paused mid-dash air. Ethan stiffened. "Wait, Grandpa," he muttered under his breath. Mr. Graham continued, oblivious to the tension building. "You raised points about humility and perseverance that even I hadn't thought to emphasize. Wisdom like that, it's rare. You've left an impression on all of us." Ethan's jaw tightened. Michael's eyes narrowed. The air had shifted. Michael finally broke the silence. His voice was sharp, laced with old bitterness. Impression. This man couldn't even provide when I was a boy. I watched him work odd jobs while my friends' fathers were men of stature. And now you call him wise. Samuel raised his gaze. Slowly, steady as stone. His words came measured, but heavy enough to cut through the noise. "I never stopped being a father, Michael. You just stopped being a son." The table froze. Ethan blinked, unsure whether to side with the man he idolized or the one he had dismissed. Michael scoffed, pushing his plate away. "You think one or two speeches erase years of weakness. You think tutoring a handful of children makes up for your failures." Samuel leaned forward, his voice firm but not raised. "Failure? No. I worked. I endured. I gave everything I had so you could stand where you stand. The shame you carry isn't from me, Michael, it's from your refusal to see sacrifice as love." The words landed like a hammer. Ethan looked between them, his arrogance faltering as cracks of uncertainty spread through his pride. For the first time, he saw his grandfather not as an old man clinging to dignity, but as someone others admired, someone who could no longer be reduced to an embarrassment. Mr. Graham shifted awkwardly, sensing the storm he had unknowingly stirred. Yet Samuel did not waver. His shoulders, once bowed under humiliation, were straight now. His presence commanded the table. Michael's face burned red. "Don't act like a hero now. You lost the right to claim that role years ago." Samuel shook his head slowly. "No, you lost the ability to recognize it. A father doesn't need applause to be a father. He only needs to love. And I loved Devon when it cost me everything." The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate, his appetite gone. Anna watched quietly, her respect for Samuel growing, though she said nothing. The hierarchy had shifted. Michael, once so sure of his authority, sat diminished. Ethan, once so dismissive, sat conflicted. And Samuel, long overlooked, now radiated a quiet strength that none could deny. The meal continued, but the air had changed. For the first time in years, Samuel was not the invisible man at the table. He was the gravity that pulled the room into truth. The auditorium was filled with chatter and laughter as students prepared for the school's annual showcase. Banners hung from the ceiling, parents and teachers mingled, and students eagerly compared speeches, projects, and awards. Ethan, dressed sharply as always, stood at the center, surrounded by a cluster of peers. His voice carried confidently over the noise, dripping with the charm he had perfected. And then Samuel walked in. He hadn't planned on attending, but Clara had insisted. "It's time you stop hiding," she told him. "The truth has a way of speaking louder than arrogance." Samuel quietly slipped into a seat near the back, unnoticed by most, but Ethan's sharp eyes caught him. For a moment, his smile faltered. He leaned closer to his group of friends. "See that old man at the back? That's my grandfather. He insists on showing up everywhere. Kind of embarrassing, really." The laughter that followed stung Samuel only slightly. It was not the same sharp wound as before. He sat with steady hands folded in his lap, his face unreadable. When the program began, Ethan took the stage for his debate performance. He was brilliant, no doubt eloquent, sharp-witted, and theatrical. Applause followed his every point. But beneath his confidence, Samuel noticed something he hadn't seen before, a subtle restlessness in the audience. Their smiles were polite, their claps respectful, but their eyes were distant. Ethan commanded attention, but he did not inspire. After the debate ended, Ethan spotted Samuel again, and something in him twisted. He wanted to reassert control. Grabbing the microphone during the closing remarks, Ethan said with a smirk, "I suppose it's nice my grandfather could make it. He always shows up, though most of the time, he doesn't really belong in these kinds of places." The remark hung in the air. A few students chuckled awkwardly, but this time the reaction was not the same. From the middle rows, a hand shot up. It was Anna, her voice firm. "Actually, Ethan, that's not true. Your grandfather stayed after class to help us when you wouldn't. If it weren't for him, some of us would have failed." A murmur rippled through the audience. Another student added, "He gave up his evenings to tutor us when you were too busy bragging about winning trophies. He's the reason a lot of us are still standing here tonight." Ethan froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The attention he had so carefully hoarded was slipping through his fingers. The teacher stepped forward, then Mr. Hayes, the same man who had once been mentored by Samuel. Ethan, he said calmly, arrogance has a short lifespan. Respect lasts longer. Your grandfather has earned ours not through titles or performances, but through generosity. The room shifted. Heads turned toward Samuel, not in pity, but in admiration. Whispers rose like a tide, not mocking him, but acknowledging him. Samuel sat quietly, his eyes lowered. He felt no triumph, no hunger for revenge, only a quiet truth settling in his chest. I didn't need revenge, he thought. I only needed truth to reveal itself. On stage, Ethan's face burned with humiliation. He tried to laugh it off, but the audience wasn't laughing. He had intended to make Samuel look small. Instead, he had exposed himself. The event ended, but the damage had been done. As the crowd dispersed, students and parents approached Samuel, thanking him, shaking his hand, recalling moments when his kindness had lifted them. Ethan watched from the corner, fists clenched, his perfect smile finally cracking. For Samuel, the night was not about victory. It was about reclaiming something he thought he had lost. Dignity, and the irony was bitter yet beautiful, his grandson's. Cruelty had only cleared the path for truth to shine brighter. The house was silent that evening, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Shadows stretched long across the dining table, where Samuel sat alone, his rough hands folded neatly together. He wasn't waiting for anyone, yet he knew somewhere in his chest that the night had not yet finished with him. The creak of the door broke the stillness. Ethan stood there, shoulders hunched, eyes swollen with shame rather than sleep. His arrogance, once as loud as a marching band, had been stripped away, leaving only the trembling honesty of a boy finally seeing his reflection without illusions. "Grandpa," he whispered, voice cracking, "I was wrong." Samuel didn't answer at first. He simply raised his eyes, calm as a lake at dusk. Ethan shuffled closer, each step heavy with guilt. "I thought you were holding me back," Ethan said, choking on the words. "But you were the only one holding me up. Every time I wanted to shine, I thought you were in my shadow. But now I sit with your shoulders I was standing on." Tears slipped down his cheeks. His hands, usually clenched into fists of pride, now clutched the edge of the table like a child desperate not to drown. "Please," Ethan whispered. "Forgive me." Samuel's chest rose slowly. He listened, but his heart was not quick to leap. For years he had been dismissed, reduced to a relic, treated as an inconvenience in the house he once built with his own hands. He had carried silence, like a burden and, sometimes like a shield. Before he could speak, another voice entered the room. "I should have been here first," Michael said from the doorway. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his eyes refusing to meet Samuel's. For a moment, father and son stood only a few feet apart, yet decades of distance lay between them. Michael's voice faltered. "I abandoned you, not just when Ethan mocked. You'd but long before. I let my pride, my resentment, bury the man who raised me. I thought if I ignored you, I could bury my own shame too." His fists clenched at his sides. His voice broke. "But I see now I was worse than Ethan. At least he's just a boy, blinded by youth. I was a man, and I still chose pride over blood." The silence that followed pressed heavy, almost unbearable. Ethan's sobs filled it in waves, but Samuel's face remained still, unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, neither harsh nor forgiving, but solemn. "Like a verdict, the greatest punishment for betrayal," Samuel said quietly. is not my anger. It's my silence." The words cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. Ethan collapsed into tears, his forehead pressed against the table, while Michael stood frozen, his breathing uneven. Neither knew what to say, because no defense could stand against a truth so sharp. Samuel rose slowly from his chair. His footsteps were steady as he crossed the room. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, not in full reconciliation, but in quiet acknowledgement of his grandson's remorse. To Michael, however, he offered only a passing glance, a glance that said, "I hear your confession, but I will not carry your guilt for you." And then Samuel walked past them both, leaving the room in silence once again. Ethan wept harder, clutching the memory of his grandfather's touch as though it were a lifeline. Michael stood in the shadows, his chest heavy with the realization that he had lost more than respect. He had lost the chance to claim his father's open embrace. For Samuel, there was no satisfaction in this moment, no triumph in being proven right, only the calm acceptance that truth had, at last, revealed itself. And for the betrayers, both grandson and son, the weight of regret began its long, unyielding work. The days after the storm felt quieter, not because the world had changed, but because Samuel had. His dignity, once trampled under the weight of betrayal, had risen again slowly, steadily, like a tree finding its way back toward the sun after years of shadow. He did not chase revenge. He did not craft elaborate punishments for those who wronged him. Instead, he simply lived with integrity, and the world noticed. Samuel's mornings were now filled with the laughter of students who gathered around him after class, eager to hear not just lessons, but the small pieces of wisdom he carried in his calm voice. He gave them patience, guidance, and the assurance that someone cared when the world seemed too heavy. For the first time in years, Samuel walked through his old school without shame. Teachers nodded at him with respect, students whispered his name with admiration, and even strangers looked at him as if they already knew his story. His silence, his endurance, had transformed into strength. Meanwhile, Ethan wrestled with the weight of regret. The arrogance that once fueled him now felt hollow. The friends who once gathered around him slipped away one by one, drawn instead to the quiet strength of his grandfather. The more Samuel's reputation grew, the smaller Ethan felt inside. One afternoon, Ethan stood at the edge of the school courtyard, watching as his grandfather helped a group of struggling students with their assignments. The students' eyes glowed with gratitude, something Ethan realized he had never earned despite all his efforts to impress. That night, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He replayed every harsh word he had thrown at his grandfather, every insult, every dismissal. By morning, the guilt was unbearable. With trembling hands, Ethan approached Samuel. His voice cracked before the first word even escaped. "Grandpa, I was wrong." His eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were holding me back. But the truth is, you were the only one holding me up." The words broke something open inside Samuel. He did not rush to embrace him, nor did he answer with immediate forgiveness. Instead, he stood still, watching his grandson struggle in the same silence he had endured for so long. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Ethan admitted, his voice shaking. "But I need you to know I'm sorry." For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. His silence carried more weight than anger ever could. Finally, he spoke, softly. "Regret is a heavy chain, Ethan. I can't take it off for you. Only you can decide whether you'll let it crush whether you'll walk forward with it and learn." Ethan collapsed into tears. Samuel did not reject him, but neither did he rush to erase the consequences of betrayal. And then another voice entered the room. Michael, the son who had turned away years ago. His face was pale, his voice trembling. "Father," he whispered, almost choking on the word, "I abandoned you out of pride. I thought I was too good for your lessons, too wise for your advice. But I see now, I wasn't rejecting you. I was rejecting the part of myself that was weak. And I was wrong." For a moment, silence filled the room again, heavier than stone. Michael's eyes glistened, his voice breaking as he fell to his knees. "I betrayed you, and I would understand if you hated me forever." Samuel's gaze softened, but his words remained steady. "The greatest punishment for betrayal," he said, his voice deep and calm, "is not my anger, it's my silence." Neither Ethan nor Michael could lift their eyes. For the first time, they understood what Samuel had carried all these years, not just wounds from their betrayal, but the strength to live without needing revenge. In the weeks that followed, Samuel continued teaching, walking with quiet dignity. His community respected him, his students adored him, and even those who once mocked him now looked at him with awe. Ethan and Michael, bound by regret, began the slow and painful work of mending their broken ties. It was not easy. Forgiveness, Samuel knew, was not a gift freely given. It was something earned over time, through humility and change. Samuel often reflected in his quiet moments, writing in his journal late at night, "I did not need revenge. Karma came on its own. All I had to do was stand tall again." And as the years passed, his story became not one of defeat, but of dignity restored. If you've ever experienced betrayal, you know the pain it carries. But tell me, do you believe karma always comes back around? Or do you think revenge is the only true answer? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and join us for more stories of justice and the quiet strength of survival.